Люди прошли толпою наверх, а их полиция не выпустила. С той стороны стояли автобусы и ждали.
Hello, and this is just some commentary on what I think's going on over in Ukraine, Ukraine war. So first, I wanted to talk about, in Davos, Switzerland, you had, Zelensky. You got the top bill there on the huge big screen, talking to old war leaders, trying to convince them, of his cause. To me, he kind of came across as like a thug, and he had, demanding weapons, and he was basically demanding $5 billion, on a regular basis. And, all these world leaders just clapping like baby seals. And, you wonder, do you have any of these people, like, actually looked into Zelensky? Like, who is this guy? Like, has anyone done that? I mean, any of the watchers or readers in this channel, they know who this guy is? I mean, he's an actor. And he played a role in a movie where they're kind of trying to expose corruption. He ended up being like, president. And so that basically turned into reality. And he has no military or political experience. And he ended up amassing a fortune of approximately $500 million, including several mansions, one that worth $30 million. And he got all this after he became president. So, if he got all that money, the Ukrainian people didn't get it. So, I mean, this guy's basically a criminal. He's a thug. And there's videos, like he posts videos, like on social media, like he's in the office and he's just like acting like a goofball. He's high as a kite, and there's a pile of drugs sitting on his desk. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. You can go find that. I got a video that I think I posted one of my videos. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is the guy, he's on the world stage like regularly, demanding like weapons and all kinds of crazy stuff. And everyone just gives him a free pass. I mean, no one talks about like who this guy really is. I mean, can you imagine if they did like one of these television shows like Fox News or MSNBC, if they told who Zelensky really is, and they showed that video of him like high as a kite. And I mean, do you think people would support this war? They know that there's some actor behind everything. And then the stuff he talks about, like, this guy is such a buffoon. Okay, he got duped into trying to come into like this whole NATO thing. Like he was duped, played the fool just to get a war going. And you have these like State Department officials, there's a video of them like laughing, like at Zelensky, because they told him that he could join NATO, and they were laughing because they knew that there was no way that was ever going to happen. But it was just part of like the game. They lied. He said that's just the way the game goes, something along those lines. And so Zelensky basically got a whole war going because he was demanding that he wanted to join NATO. And Russia was like, there's no way you can join NATO. If you do, we're going to end up invading you. I mean, it was all part of the Minsk Accords. Minsk 1 and then you have Minsk 2. It was supposed to be like a settlement for peace and certain conditions and so on. So Zelensky got snookered into this whole thing with the whole NATO thing. And it was all done for a reason. It was done by design, and they needed a buffoon in charge of Ukraine. That's why they put this guy there. He's called a puppet. There's a reason they call people puppets. Okay, and then you look at like in this World Economic Forum, that's what Davos is. He demanded that the countries of the world blockade the ports of Russia. Okay, I don't know if he realizes what he's talking about, but that is like a full act of war. That when you blockade ports, it's considered active war. And so all these world countries are supposed to just like join World War III to support Zelensky, so he can be a rich bastard. And then he asked the countries to all join in a full oil embargo against Russia. Okay, now there's countries like in Europe that have already mentioned that there's no way they can do an oil embargo because it would destroy their economies. Like, I believe Hungary and Serbia, a few other countries had voiced their strong concerns and opposition because they didn't want to destroy their economy. They need that gas and oil. Zelensky doesn't care. If everyone in the world completely suffers and goes into a massive recession, World War III, he doesn't care. He's all coked up in his office, just rattling, BS off. And this is all done by design. The same way they put in, Captain Dementia in charge of the United States. And speaking of that devil, just to show you, I have a video, who's really running the White House. And, basically making the point that, Biden is not in control there. There's a cabal behind this guy. And you saw that when he was over in Japan, right? Where he was asked by a reporter about whether he would defend Taiwan militarily if Chinese attacked it. He said yes. That's my commitment, or basically it's his policy, something like that. And the Chinese are outraged. And no sooner the White House, who's really running it, wheeled back Captain Dementia's comments. Like, he doesn't even exist. He doesn't even matter. He's just like this old guy on a gurney they roll out every once in a while to stand there and look like an idiot. The White House, or the cabal, wheeled back his comments and claimed that we are in agreement with the one China policy, and others had mentioned that that there was a strategic ambiguity policy regarding Taiwan. So I think that's proof that whoever is in the White House is not Biden. He might sleep there, but he's not in charge. And I think that's pretty scary. And I don't understand how the American people or whatever, politicians, or they hear things like that and they just give it a pass. Because that's just proof that supposedly who's supposed to be the president isn't in charge at all. In fact, things that he say, it's actually the real policies are completely opposite. He's saying we're going to defend militarily, and then you have this other one that's basically saying, we agree with one China policy. I mean, it's like completely opposite. So to me, that's pretty scary, because you don't know who really is in charge. I label this as, the Joker is in the White House, because you don't know who really is in charge. I have my suspicions, but really it's like the big question mark. And I think that's pretty scary. And all these decisions going on, Ukraine war and everything, it's being done by people you don't even know, that's controlling things. Okay, that's scary. Okay, and regarding the these weapons, they're talking about sending over heavy weapons, rocket systems and things like that have ranges of like 150 kilometers or longer. I mean, some of these things can like hit targets like in Russia cities and stuff. And Russia has already said that this is a line in the sand, okay? That this is the red line, rather. And this bill, like, to allow the sale, there's They just passed a $40 billion package in addition to all the other ones before that. And now they're doing a new one just like a day or two after the $40 billion one. They're already doing another one. And this one is for heavy stuff. As I mentioned, the rockets and things like, the multiple launch rocket systems. And these are the red line. And it is sitting on Biden's desk to get signed. Okay? So this is another thing that's extremely escalatory. We are like teetering like on World War III. And to make things even worse, you look at what the new stuff that the EU is talking about, headed by Boris Johnson. He wants to send a Navy fleet down to the Baltic Sea. I mean, can you imagine that? Having British ships and French ships or whoever else is going to participate going into the Black Sea to confront Russia. Because that's what it's going to be. I mean, that's like World War III guaranteed. And these leaders, they don't even care. It's like they want a war. Boris Johnson it's such the dilemma in his country. I mean, the guy, I don't know how he's still in power. His country is like crumbling. It's like a third world country now. There's rampant inflation, their cost of living is soaring. People living on pensions are basically claiming that they can't live anymore on the money. It's getting really bad. They have a huge crisis over there, and a lot of it is to do with the elderly on pensions. So they're going to bring these ships in, and it's all done in the name of we need to get grain, wheat out of Ukraine. I mean, this thing is like so absurd, and this stuff works on like dumb sheep. This stuff works on dumb sheep that they say that we have to go save the world. We have to go into Black Sea and open up a corridor to get the grain out of Ukraine. Slava Ukraine, we need to get the grain to the poor countries. Okay. This is all like so sinister. Like, yes, it sounds good like to the dumb sheep, but when you start looking at it in more critical, thinking, number one, does NATO and the United States really care about famine anywhere in the world? Look at Venezuela. I mean, the United States caused that. That's a famine induced by the United States. Why? Because they didn't like the leader. So they destroyed the country's economy, and people were eating their pets. And they've lost like a tremendous amount of weight. As a population, they were starving. And that was all because of the United States sanctions. This was the richest country in South America at one time. So the United States has sanctioned Iran and caused immense suffering to those people. It has caused wars everywhere. You probably lose count of how many wars the United States did, how many invasions they've done. Look at Vietnam, look at Afghanistan, Iran, what they did with the sanctions, Iraq, with sanctions and then a war. Look at the United States sponsored war with Yemen, where we sell weapons to Saudi Arabia to kill people over there. They're starving. Syria, it's a horrible situation. Sanctions and war. Libya. Does the United States care about famine and the lapdogs of the EU? Of course not. They could care less. They're liars. So this whole thing about getting grain out of Ukraine is a front. Now, Ukraine was shipping grain out by truck before, and there's lots of pictures that it actually the EU is all touting that as like a great victory, that they were able to ship all that grain out in trucks and stuff. And also, you can ship grain out of Mariupol. It's now open, and the corridor has been demined. Now, Russia had warned that the corridors to other Ukrainian ports are not demined. Now, these are Ukrainian mines. They did this to prevent Russia from invading. Why would Russia put mines to blow their own ships up? They're used as defense to prevent going into the territorial waters. So this whole thing is a fraud about getting grain out of Ukraine. Now keep in mind, grain in Ukraine's like number 5 or so on the list of exporters. The wheat, rather. I think Russia's number 1. And with all the United States sanctions and everything on Russia, Russia ended up turning away any grain. They're actually going to be only keeping grain for their own people. So here's the number 1 exporter of wheat. Because of the war and the sanctions, they're basically saying we're not exporting. So you lost number 1. That's the real concern. Who cares about number 5 when number 1 can't export? And you go, well, why can't they export? Well, because the United States, the SWIFT system, they closed that off to doing payments. So the Russians can't sell grain very easily. And they've also inhibited a lot of things with their shipping and, and basically strong-arming, all these nations from doing any commerce with Russia. I mean, look at the pressure they put on India, not to do, trade with Russia. So all these little countries, they're all a little afraid. So really the sanctions is the real problem for this famine. And everyone knew that. Like back when they announced all these crippling sanctions, a lot of experts were like warning about you're going to cause like a global recession, you're going to cause famine, and you're going to cause a lot of pain for a lot of people. Look at Europe. I mean, they're suffering more than the Russians. But at the time, it all sounded good. Biden thought he was a big hero, announcing crippling sanctions. It ended up being a horror show. I mean, these sanctions have only started. Just wait like another year. There's going to be so much suffering from all these sanctions, in Russia too. Look at the United States. Look at the inflation rates and all this stuff, and cost of living here is soaring. In the UK, it's terrible. It's even worse in the United States. So, this whole thing with the getting into the Black Sea with a fleet, okay, this is like what it's all about. The wheat thing was a front. So they bring in all their ships, and they're probably going to start a war. But what do they really want to do? They really want to do is get to a port in Ukraine. They want to open up a port to the west. Because it's a strategic victory. You need to get a port in control. Because the best way to move things is with a ship. You can bring so much more in with a ship. And it's not... Okay, the problem is you bring in all these tanks and howitzers, into Ukraine. How do they come in? They're coming in on rail cars, just open. Or they're coming in, back of big trucks, open. You can't hide a tank very easy. Everyone can see these are tanks. You got a few rail cars full of tanks going into the front lines. I mean, the Russians know exactly where all these things are. They're tracking them. They got UAV satellites and eyes everywhere. So while they're bringing in all these things, they're being targeted. All of them. Most of the stuff that's coming into Ukraine, I would probably say, is probably destroyed. You're getting the smaller stuff, the things you can hide in boxes and everything. United States has been using Red Cross, Ukrainian United States, Red Cross vehicles to move ammunition around. They also use the OSCE. That's the agency that's working for the United Nations to track human rights violations and things, and the monitor the situation in the Donbass area, like shells and things like that. How many shells they fire. But they were working for the CIA in Ukraine. There's supposed to be an agency that was there to monitor the situation. They were using their cameras. They had cameras everywhere. They were using these cameras. I mean, they kind of duped everyone in the LPR and the DPR. They duped them. They were using those cameras to spot Ukrainian rockets. And get this, they were targeting civilians. They were targeting apartment buildings. And they were using these cameras to zero in their artillery. I mean, the whole thing about the shelling in these areas is just basically destroying, houses and apartments. And I mean, that's been going on for 8 years. They're not targeting military. They're just firing at civilians. So they were using these cameras to help kill civilians. So you can see how, these people, they don't trust anything to do with the West anymore. And so if you have this UN sanctioned agency or whatever to monitor these things, why would you possibly think that opening up this corridor for grain would be anything but totally sinister? And so what do I think they're going to do if they got their way? Say the Russians just say, okay, and they let all these British warships and French warships in, and the Russians are just monitoring it. What do you think they would want? They would probably try to get to a Ukrainian port. They would do their own demining. Then you don't know what they're going to do. They could bring in UN peacekeepers or EU peacekeepers or some small detachment that they're basically saying we're protecting the corridor or protecting this zone to allow grain to come out. Okay, so basically you just took that away from a target for the Russians, because you wouldn't be able to attack say Odessa if they used Odessa, because they would have these NATO peacekeepers or something along those lines. You see how they can use us? Or they could bring in heavy weapons in ships. And you have no idea what's inside this ship. It's hidden from view. And so, next thing you know, they have all these multiple rocket launchers in Odessa. So the Russians know that this is a tricky thing here. And they're probably going to they're probably going to make some very aggressive defensive positioning, is my guess, if this would be something the EU decides. It could get really ugly. Okay, and then you got the Mitt Romneys and the Adam Kinzingers, basically advocating for full-on nuclear war almost. This stuff is getting so out of control. And lucky for Turkey, they blocked We're lucky that Turkey blocked Finland and Sweden from getting into NATO, because that would have been another big one. And the things that with this is it's escalating like almost every day. Like there's something new that raises the brink of a war, and it's like the boiling frog. Every day the water gets a little hotter. And then in a couple more days we'll hear something else that's very provoking. And most of this stuff that's provoking is the West. I mean, you'll hear some comments sometimes from the Russians, but it's mostly in response to something that the West is going to do. And the West has always gotten its way. It's like a bully that always gets its way, and it's getting frustrated. So it keeps on trying to get more aggressive. But the bear is strong. And the bear let it know that he's fighting back. Now, another news that's very, very troubling is that in Greece, in the waters off Greece, and this is an example of that aggressiveness I'm talking about. The United States seized an oil tanker that was flying under like a Russian flag. But supposedly it was Iranian in reality. And it was full of Iranian oil. And maybe they thought that if they ran under a Russian flag, they would have more protection or something. But anyway, the United States just seized it. And they're taking the tanker to the United States. They just stole like a whole tanker full of Iranian oil, literally. I mean, this is like piracy. I mean, it's different than if you try to seize a vessel and you keep it in port and you do a trial, or you do some kind of a police action or something, investigation. But the United States just literally just stole this Iranian oil tanker. There's no other words to describe it. They just basically stole an Iranian oil tanker. They took it over, and they're taking the oil to the United States. So Iran is infuriated. So they go to Greece. This is hot news, like right off the press. They go and they steal 2 oil tankers sitting off the coast of Greece. I'm not sure who owns these or whatever, but I mean, talk about escalatory. I mean, this could go ballistic as well. And then you had the United States trying to do more sanctions on North Korea. And China and Russia blocked it. Basically, they say it's exhausting. With more sanctions on North Korea. It's literally that country starving to death. Talking about the famine, look at the hypocrites. More sanctions on a starving country. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So, and then you got, Kissinger. He was at Davos, or televised into Davos. And, I mean, one thing you have to say about Kissinger is he knows what he's talking about. I mean, he was, usually hailed as one of the great foreign policy brains, of like the 70s and 80s, and he was a very powerful figure in American politics. He was sort of like, the father of politics in a lot of administrations, or as a think tank. So here's Kissinger. I mean, you should at least respect this man. Okay, if you don't agree with him, you should at least be respectful. Just based on who he is and his knowledge. Now he's old. I don't think he's senile from what I'm hearing. He seems to make sense. And he's basically saying that Ukraine is going to need to concede territories to get a peace, and he's basically saying you need to make peace. He's smart. Kissinger's smart. But the thugs lashed out at this man. Now, Kissinger's right. I mean, the only thing like to save Ukraine right now is if Ukraine just got on its knees, basically, and just pleaded for mercy. And I'm not kidding. They would have to forfeit, of course the LPR and DPR are already basically conquered. They have all their territory of the original, lines of demarcation. Now the Russians already have a lot of territory in their land bridge that they really wanted. They've got what they, would consider a pretty nice chunk. Now the Russians are not just going to give up that land bridge and give up Mariupol. That's gone. It's never coming back. In fact, they're already giving citizenship to people in Kherson. They have opened up like a passport agency there where they're literally just doling out Russian passports. So they've already basically, considered that part of Russia already. And they're also doing like SIM cards for cell phones. They're doing those in Russian. They changed the currency already. Like supermarkets, you buy things now like you can buy them rubles. All these territories have switched to Russian, and they're bringing food in and everything. So things are kind of getting back to normal in some of these areas, and it's becoming Russianized. So you think that they're just going to like give all that up? And they're doing referendums in some of these places where they're basically becoming separatist cities or land away from Ukraine. So these things are all in the referendums that are coming up. So these places are gone. They're not coming back to Ukraine. And knowing that, but I think if Ukraine wants peace, it's not only going to have to concede all these things that the Russians own, they're going to have to concede even more. Like what other things Russia wants. I mean, right now Russia's winning. And they're getting some nice prizes. And now keep in mind that Russia considers Ukraine part of Russia. It was only during one of the administrations after World War II that they kind of separated Ukraine into its own country, part of the, part of the Soviet Union. But it had always been considered part of Russia. So, the hardcore Russians behind this stuff, they don't look at Ukraine the way the West does. So Kissinger is right. And he's not just a little right. He's like totally right. And he's trying to throw some cold water in some of these, propagandists' faces. Say, wake up. You're going to lose Ukraine. Like, you're going to completely lose it. Not just a little bit of land. You're going to lose the whole thing. And I think this statesman, Kissinger, he didn't deserve to get like cursed at and stuff. And so you had, Zelensky just railed into Kissinger, and he's, in his thug style, basically, denouncing everything Kissinger said. And, he basically claims they're not going to concede anything. It's like as if Zelensky thinks he's winning. And then you got this other fella. This guy, he's like dangerous. He's worse than Zelensky. This Alexei Arestovich. Now this guy, he's like the presidential advisor. Now this guy, when you look at his background, it's worse than Zelensky. He's an actor too. And he's like this big blogger, propagandist. And everyone, his nicknames are Mr. Fake, 80th level troll. I mean, everything is so negative when you really look at what people write about, like who he really is. And you know, he just like curses like crazy. So this is what basically he says. Okay, now keep in mind this guy is supposed to be a presidential advisor. All right, look how he talks to other world leaders. He says, "Go f yourselves," with all these proposals. You dumb effers. To trade Ukrainian territory a little bit. Are you effing crazy? Our children are dying. Soldiers are stopping shells with their bodies. You know, basically, you know. So I mean, this is the guy who's a presidential advisor. He has no military or political experience, and he's basically a blogger, and he's a liar. And so this is what he said to world leaders and people like Kissinger. Go F yourselves, you dumb effers. That was the response to Kissinger. I mean, you see how this Ukrainian leadership thinks and acts. Is this professional people? I mean, do you think something like in like Germany, like a presidential advisor in Germany would talk like that? Have you ever heard a presidential advisor talk like that? This is an administration of thugs and criminals. You know, and you also got, you know, the Azov battalion in there running everything. This is a criminal organization. You know, I'd like to know how much money this guy embezzled too. And I wouldn't be surprised if he has CIA MI6 links as well. So anyway, and lastly, I just wanted to bring up, you know, you got the Washington Post article, which is, you know, a huge turnaround. What it is the reality is getting so powerful that they can't keep this Ukraine win-win-winning narrative going anymore. And the more they keep on going with it, the more they look like fools. And Washington Post, keep in mind, is run by intelligence agencies. It's the one closest to intelligence agencies for sources, and a lot of things they put out is stuff that's planted, you know, by the intelligence agencies. People who probably have connections with the intelligence agencies, write for, and big government think tanks. So Washington Post is like very influential, and it's written by people who know what's going on. You know, they can manipulate if they want, or they can throw truth bombs out there if they need to. And they need to. And that's why they did it. Because the narrative is just so insane at this point, where there's been like, you know, over 8,000 Ukrainian troops already surrendered, and their lines are collapsing. And the Washington Post actually put that the lines are collapsing, that the Ukrainians being being defeated. And this is like, a lot of people probably when they read that article were like, this can't be. You know, we were told, you know, Ukraine was winning. It was counting all the tanks they blew up every day and celebrating, you know, goes to Kiev, and you know, goes to Kiev, you know, shot down like 40-some, you know, Russian aircraft, and he's a legend. You know, after the war, he's going to be a huge celebrated hero. So it was all lies. You know, so do you go down with the ship with the lies? You know, the Zelensky Titanic, or do you eventually, you know, do bail out in the lifeboat and claim, you know, some truth? And you know, the thing is, you can't just let these guys go. I mean, these guys lied all the way. You know, it's like a furious enemy, you know, shooting at you for like years in a long war, and then all of a sudden he sees like he's losing, and he jumps up and he waves a white flag at the end, like right before they're ready to capitulate. I mean, do you just like give that guy a pass? Oh, you can go home now. So you know you're gonna see a lot more media kind of starting to turn on the Biden Zelensky lies, and Washington Post is the first to do that. And you can see why they wanted to get that aid package done like pronto. They had that thing like passed like in a couple days. It was already on Captain Dementia's desk, ready to sign. And they needed to sign that thing ASAP because they knew that the narrative was going to explode. And think about it, like, okay, say that Washington Post article came out like while they were debating that. How does it look that you're sending $40 billion to a country that's like imminently being defeated? Like, why do you need $40 billion to flush down a toilet? You see, all this money was going to corrupt politicians, shady defense contractors. Only $13 billion actually was going to go to appropriated, you know, defense contractors. The rest is like basically unaccounted for. So it's just going, you know, it's a slush fund over to Ukraine, the most corrupt country in the world. So you see why Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, and the rest of the cabal wanted this thing so badly. They were going to be rich as hell when they fleeced the American people again. And they knew that, you know, Ukraine was losing bad, and that's why they had to do that to get the money that they wanted right away. And they also know once the midterms come around, there's no chance something like that would have passed. So it's just more corruption as normal. So anyway, those are just my my thoughts on what I think's going on over there. Thought I'd share, and please comment and tell me what you think.